The Pentagon's new defense strategy calls on U.S. allies, including South Korea, to strengthen their own security as the Trump administration places priority on its homeland. Welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, January 27th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. The main responsibility of deterring North Korea will lie with South Korea as the U.S. offers critical but more limited support. Now, this is according to the U.S. National Defense Strategy released by the Pentagon under the Trump administration. For more on the implications of this new defense document by the U.S., I have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Ruy, welcome back.
Nice to be here, Sunhee.
I also have Professor Choi Hyun Jin at Kyung Hee University joining our talk virtually. Professor Choi, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Ruy, let's begin with details with regard to security here on the Korean peninsula as outlined by the Pentagon under the second Trump administration.
Right, with the Pentagon's new defense strategy, South Korea seems to, or it seems that it's going to take the driver's seat on their defense while the U.S. narrows its role in it. The interesting question that arises is how much will they narrow this role in Korea and other things related to Pyongyang. But let's start with number one. This doesn't mean that Washington is walking away, and it's quite... Well, I wouldn't say it's 100% clear, but at least there's a strong signals that they will keep nuclear deterrence, which means that they will keep this nuclear umbrella over South Korea in case there's some kind of attack or war. But the U.S. role now is framed as critical but more limited. And this is in the context of two things. Since long time ago, even before the current administration, South Korea wants to take control of the operational control in wartime, what is called the OPCON. Lee Jae-myung, the current president, has promised that he will get that control during this term. So it is not surprised that in that sense, U.S. is saying, yeah, we will give you this protagonism by this transfer, potentially. But it's also a complex topic in a way that this promise has been made before by other administrations and still haven't been done because the U.S. arguably says that South Korea is not ready for the transfer after doing certain tests, etc., etc. This is all in line also with other topics like the administration of Donald Trump asking other countries to raise their defense spending, to take a higher burden of the cost of maintaining U.S. troops in their respective countries, things that South Korea has committed to do. And there is this one thing that, of course, everybody's pointing out, that is that denuclearization of the peninsula is not mentioned in the document. And this happens right after the National Defense Strategy also didn't mention the denuclearization of North Korea or the Korean Peninsula, and also after the Nuclear Consultative Group met last year and also didn't mention it in their report, which was a breakthrough that they didn't mention this part. So there are many interpretations about this. Some are just saying that U.S. is trying to say we are not going to prioritize North Korea as much as before. Others are saying, well, this could be related to the fact that Trump has continuously promised that he will try to meet Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, as soon as possible. And maybe because North Korea says as a condition, it has signaled that if U.S. wants to dialogue with us, denuclearization has to be off the table. So probably it could be taken as a signal, but still we're stretching it a lot in that sense. What is clear is that that topic, at least for U.S. in those documents, is not mentioned, and we will need to see in the future how these get actually applied.
Right, and before we delve deeper into that defense document, I'd just like to ask ask you about a developing story. The Joint Chiefs of Staff here in South Korea spoke about the launch of an unidentified projectile by North Korea today. What's the latest on that front?
Yes, less than 2 hours ago, the South Korean army detected multiple projectiles that were launched from North Korea to the East Sea. They haven't given much details about them. First they say it was one, now they say it's multiple. But the Japanese authorities also detected the launch and have given a little bit of more signals of what it could be. They say it's potentially ballistic missiles. And Prime Minister Takaichi said that it was two missiles, two apparently ballistic missiles. They don't confirm it, but we could conclude that at least 2 missiles were launched. And the details, well, this is an ongoing news, so probably in the near future we'll get to know more details about it. The last launch that was made by North Korea this year was in the beginning of the month, on 4th of January, when Lee Jae-myung, the president of South Korea, was going to China to meet the leader of their Xi Jinping. So again, there is tension in the peninsula. The context is there's no dialogue between the Koreas for many years already. There's no signals that this will happen again, and this is just another potential message of Pyongyang that they will keep doing their weapons test and all these type of measures that usually are highly criticized by the international community.
Right, and against this backdrop, Professor Choi, as Ruy mentioned earlier, I'm going to use his metaphor. The latest defense document by the Pentagon under the second Trump administration seeks to place South Korea in the driver's seat with regard to deterring North Korea. What do you believe are the pros and cons of this strategy for the Lee Jae-myung administration?
Thank you for the question. This new strategy brings both opportunities and also challenges for the Lee Jae-myung administration. And let me start with the more positive side. First, this policy treats South Korea as a strong and a mature security partner. It acknowledges that South Korea has a powerful military and advanced weapon and a high defense budget. And therefore, this policy, this strategy fits very well with the current Lee Jae-myung administration's self-reliance defense policy. And secondly, taking a leading role can give Seoul a more control over its own security decision. So instead of relying fully on Washington, we can shape deterrence on the peninsula more directly. But now let's turn to the more negative side. The biggest worry is about the U.S. commitment in a security crisis. When Washington talks about a more limited support, the many people in South Korea may naturally ask this question: will U.S. stand by us in times of a crisis? Then another concern is the growing burden on the Korean government. Taking a greater responsibility means higher defense costs and harder policy decision, and also a greater political pressure at home. And this will not be easy for the Lee Jae-myung administration to manage, I think. And also there is also concern about North Korea as well. If the United States focuses more on managing threat rather than denuclearization, the South Korea may face difficult decisions about how to deal with Pyongyang. So in general, this new strategy gives Seoul more responsibility and also more independence. But it also requires a very careful coordination with Washington as well.
Right, and that is perhaps why this new strategy by the Pentagon was discussed between officials here and U.S. Under Secretary of Defense Policy Elbridge Colby, who was in South Korea. What's the latest on that front with regard to the discussions?
Well, Undersecretary Colby, which is the number 3 in the Pentagon, had a busy schedule yesterday. He had ministerial meetings with Foreign Affairs, Defense, and met also the National Security Advisor. He appeared in a forum where he outlined the alliance modernization, the burden sharing. He also has scheduled a visit to Camp Humphreys of the US-ROK, the US forces in South Korea, reinforcing the well, apparently reinforcing the continuity of those troops here. And he also, by the end of the day, he posted in social media that South Korea was a model ally, something that he repeated a lot, reiterated a lot in all these events, and also showing or commenting that they are meeting that South Korea is meeting the global standard of spending 3.5% of GDP in defense. So this was in general his activities, of course, in the context of this national defense strategy. He did mention in the meeting with Foreign Affairs and Defense this new protagonism that South Korea will take according to the new document or the new strategy of the US. There is one subject that, well, also ongoing news. We woke up today with something that seems unrelated, but I will show you the connection. Today, President Donald Trump announced that he will reapply higher tariffs on autos and other reciprocal tariffs that he used to apply before they reached last year with Seoul another trade and security agreement. I know I'm talking about tariffs, but this agreement in full, it included also submarine cooperation. This means that US, when they were, as part of the negotiation to reduce the tariffs, US approved South Korea to develop or to adopt submarines, nuclear-propelled submarines. And this yesterday was discussed, well, not discussed, even was discussed, but also was, Undersecretary Colby was showing positive signs that, yeah, they were going ahead with this plan and that this will reinforce the alliance. But now with this news, we don't really know how far is this going to get, because until Seoul and US solve that issue, the whole pact that they made last year could be at risk. And there's a Supreme Court, US Supreme Court pending to approve or to rule to approve or deny the tariffs, which will be a big hit on Trump. And South Korea, we don't really know what's the strategy, but at least it has not approved the plan through the parliament, which means that if South Korea somehow managed to wait or cannot approve this, the Supreme Court of US could refute this agreement, and now we're in a mess that we don't know if even things related to security and defense will be applied under this new pact. So right now, with this new development, we could say that Undersecretary Colby seemed to have these signals that they were gonna go ahead with these plans related to OPCON, related to submarines, etc., etc. Everything that we already discussed and Professor Choi also was mentioning in detail. But with this new development, we are all questioning if this is actually gonna follow through.
Right, the uncertainty triggered by Mr. Trump's social media posts about raising tariffs on South Korea to 25% from 15%. Professor Choi, I'd like to take your attention to something that Ruy said earlier. He pointed out that this defense strategy by the Pentagon makes no mention of denuclearization. What are your thoughts regarding this particular omission?
I think this omission is not accidental. Therefore, it should be read very carefully. I believe this is intentional. By leaving out the word, the denuclearization, Washington is showing a more realistic view of today's security situation. In other words, the US does not expect North Korea to give up its nuclear weapon anytime soon. So instead, it is putting more weight on deterrence and stability in the Korean peninsula. And secondly, and what is the purpose of this choice? So I think by not using strong and fixed language such as denuclearization, the United States is keeping its foreign policy more flexible, and therefore is trying to avoid locking itself into goals that are not really achievable. And finally, this is an important question. Can this create a better environment for talks between Washington and Pyongyang? In some ways, yes. In general, a softer voice and public position and a softer language choice can make dialogue less tense and also more probable. And also it can create more space for step-by-step talks with Pyongyang. But there is also a clear downside as well. North Korea may see this silence as a sign that Washington is quietly accepting its nuclear power status. And that could weaken the global pressure on Pyongyang, and it can raise concern here in South Korea. So in general, this omission is showing a clear shift from ideal goal to practical risk management, and it gives Washington a more room to negotiate and also more opportunity to manage tension. But at the same time, it also requires very close coordination with Seoul to avoid sending the wrong message to North Korea.
Right. Ruy, not only does the Pentagon omit denuclearization, the Pentagon latest document, defense document, omit North Korea's denuclearization, it also makes no mention of Taiwan. And according to foreign media, it also reportedly downplays the threat posed by China. Could you first begin by telling us a bit about what has been shared about China and what appear to be the broader implications of this new stance by the Pentagon with regard to defense?
Of course, China faded from center stage in this new defense strategy, which was also has not been heard in a long time. If you compare it with the strategy during the administration of Joe Biden, China was labeled as a pacing challenge and threat to U.S. security. And now the shift goes, of course, not mentioning anything similar and saying that Beijing will be approached through strength and not confrontation. And the document makes emphasis on strategic stability, de-escalation, and denial defense instead of containments. This new approach is very much in line with what Professor Choi was mentioning related to North Korea. U.S. wants to have this strategy more in line with the America First, let's say, view of the administration of Donald Trump, in the sense that they want more flexibility on negotiations. They don't want to be now acting like the police of the world, the police of that region, in the greatest scale that they used to do, allegedly at least. And this now is approaching China through a way where it seems that they are open more about negotiation instead of them setting the pace or how things have to be done in the region. Regarding Taiwan, yeah, it caught the attention, just as denuclearization was not mentioned, that Taiwan was also not mentioned in comparison to previous national defense strategy. I was talking to colleagues of Taiwan journalists, and they were telling me that actually that particular part was not as big news in Taiwan. Something that surprised me, of course, well, that's not the area I cover, but I thought that was going to be a major concern or be interpreted as U.S. abandoning or signaling that they will reduce protection on the region. But they were telling me that they focus more on the actual actions, and when it's related to the documents, it doesn't actually caught their attention as much. Well, this is, I'm quoting somebody, I don't know exactly the reaction there in the territory, but at least it seems that they were not worried excessively about this. Being that said, it still is another signal of everything that we have discussed, of this new approach that the U.S. is taking, and that now they will have a diplomatic flexibility with Beijing even in these matters. Recently, also, there was some big news in China where Xi Jinping was made, or practically fired, the number 2 and number 3 of the military committee. There's no evidence right now that this is related with all these things or shifts that are happening, but of course it's a big issue that also could signal that there's going to be a new approach from China in these matters. So again, let's take it as for now, until we have more information, as a signal of this new approach of the U.S. It's not an abandonment of the region. It doesn't mean that they will leave Taiwan to China, but it's more about how they will approach these problems, more in this flexibility or diplomatic flexibility that Professor Choi was mentioning.
Right then. Professor, with regard to Russia, though, this U.S. defense paper claims Moscow, and I'm quoting, remains a persistent but manageable threat to NATO's eastern members. How does this stance look to affect future peace talks for Ukraine, do you think?
Yes, this wording is important. By calling Russia a persistent but manageable threat, the US is saying that Russia is a serious problem, but not the one that must be destroyed. In other words, the Washington sees Russia as a challenge, but this challenge can be kept under control. But Russia is not an enemy that must be defeated. So what does it mean for peace talk on Ukraine? First, I think it can make peace talks more possible. If the U.S. believes that the war can be contained, it may be more open to negotiation that can stop the fighting and also reduce damage to Ukrainian people. And this language also helps lower tension in Ukraine. And it signals that the goal is stability, not endless escalation. But however, there's also a negative side as well. The Ukraine may worry that this approach could lead to less pressure on Russia. And Ukraine may also fear that its partners, such as NATO and the United States, will focus more on stability rather than restoring and protecting its own sovereignty and also independence. And for Europe, this stance also means greater responsibility. If the United States takes a more balanced approach between other Western Europe and also Russia, that means European countries may need to do more in supporting Ukraine and also protecting themselves. So overall, this U.S. position is creating more realistic environment for peace talk, but it also raises a difficult question. The peace talks may become easier to start, but it could require very hard compromise. The key issue here is whether Ukraine can remain as an equal partner and equal voice in any future peace negotiation. My personal opinion to this question is negative.
Professor Choi, let's end then with a question with regard to South Korea. So as the U.S. seeks to place its priority on homeland security, what are your suggestions for South Korea to bolster its own security here in this part of the world, very briefly speaking?
Yeah, the first one is our priority is always deterrence. The North Korea must believe that if we start a war, the cost will be immediate and overwhelming. The words alone are not enough, and this kind of belief is coming from real conventional power, and therefore we need a more and continued investment in their conventional strike force, such as a Hyunmoo-5 ballistic missile and also next generation air power, such as F-35K fighter. And at the same time, strong self-defense does not mean acting alone. The South Korea must maintain a strong alliance with the United States. So the goal is not to choose between alliance and autonomy. The goal is both. So we must aim for strong self-defense and at the same time, strong teamwork with the United States.
Right, a balance then between the two. All right, Professor Choi, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
And we're here in the studio. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Sunhee.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.